invisible string theory?
What the fuck is that?
The universe will keep two people apart until the timing is right. You'll meet in the most random of circumstances, only to find out that they were hidden in plain sight the whole time. There's a video that was released, right? And it was trending, it was going viral and stuff.
Let me see.
So it's like a 5-minute video of Britney at this festival. It's so blurry and badly shot from '96 that you can't really make out any faces, which makes this video even more bizarre.
Watch.
There's Britney. All right, get ready for this. Ready? Britney, me. What? It's not even possible.
What the So they were in each other's lives since they were kids, bro. And that's the whole invisible string theory, that the universe or whatever, a higher power is saving this person for you, but they have to be in your life eventually, bro. They're gonna be in the background the whole time. Think about it, bro. They never knew each other.
Yeah.
He didn't even acknowledge her, bro.
That's beautiful. Are we considered part of the invisible string theory?
Low key, bro. We so happened to go to fucking aerobics.
And then we got separated.
Worked at McDonald's. And now we're doing YouTube, bro. It's like it was a part of life, bro. It was supposed to happen that way.
Let us know your guys' person who you met in your life who makes sense with this whole invisible string theory.
In June 2016, 23-year-old Colin Scott was visiting Yellowstone with his sister Sable. The two ventured to the Norris Geyser Basin, one of the park's hottest and most active geothermal areas. They then left the designated path and wandered dangerously close to one of the hot springs. Reports say they were looking for a place to hot pool, an activity where people soak in hot springs, which is illegal and extremely risky in Yellowstone. And while leaning down to test the water, Colin suddenly lost his footing, and in an instant he slipped and plunged into the steaming hot spring. The water just wasn't boiling either, it was deadly. At 200 degrees Fahrenheit, his skin burned almost immediately upon contact, scalding him in an unimaginable wave of pain. The acidic water only added to the horror, beginning to break down his skin and flesh in seconds. His sister could only watch in horror, unable to pull him out of the scalding pool as he screamed for help. When the park rangers arrived, there was very little they could do. The high acidity of the spring meant that by the time they could begin searching, the water had dissolved nearly all organic matter. Colin's body had been completely consumed by the boiling corrosive water, leaving only painful memories for his sister. This is a very gruesome and unfortunate death, and may Colin Scott rest in peace.
Nudist resort, 2 deceased victims, and a massive police standoff with a man threatening more destruction. It sounds like a far-fetched film, but this actually happened in California. It was the 29th of August. Police were deeply concerned for the welfare of an elderly couple living in a nudist resort in Redlands, California. Dan and Stephanie Menard, in their 70s, had disappeared from their trailer. Their little dog Cuddles had also vanished. The pair were described as wonderful, warm people, and it was completely out of character for them to just vanish. They were long-time residents of the Olive Dell Ranch RV park and resort, and unsettlingly, their car had been discovered with the key in the ignition and it had just been abandoned. Then a disturbing call came into the police. The caller said they were a family member of a man named Michael Sparks. Now, he also lived at the resort and turned out he was their next door neighbour. He apparently confessed to killing an elderly couple, although he didn't admit that it was this elderly couple, and was threatening to unalive himself. Officers locked down the entire community and got a loudhailer and were trying to make contact with Michael, but had no luck. Then more news. Police heard that Michael had apparently barricaded himself into his property with weapons. A huge police standoff began and officers had to send a drone in to examine the property. However, even with the use of the drone, they still couldn't see if Michael was actually inside. They ended up getting an armoured police vehicle to literally ram down the front of the property. Turns out Michael was in fact inside and had tried to unalive himself with a rifle, but it had misfired. He was detained and taken into custody and is charged with 2 counts of murder. On Michael's property, a grim discovery was made. There were bags of what was deemed to be human remains that were tragically identified as the missing couple. A coroner determined they had died from blunt force trauma, but it is not known what the motive was. Sadly, no one knows where their dog Cuddles is.
This woman claimed that her 18-month-old daughter would become the next Jeffrey Dahmer and killed her because of it. I don't think that I've ever been more angry reading a true crime case. This is Cheyenne Hill. Police were called to Riley Children's Hospital in Indiana on November 23, 2022 after Cheyenne's daughter, 18-month-old Eliana, was admitted with horrific injuries. Eliana was severely malnourished and had a brain bleed, a broken collarbone, bruises on her face, and a swollen and deformed head. After seeing just how bad her injuries were, someone in Child Services notified authorities about Eliana's condition, which sparked an investigation into Cheyenne. While she was still hospitalized, Cheyenne told police that Eliana would become the next Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer who killed at least 17 men and boys starting in 1978. She went on to say that she believed her daughter was not a nice kid and that something wasn't right with her. When police asked her why she compared her 18-month-old to Jeffrey Dahmer, she laughed, and as Eliana lay there dying, Cheyenne called her an asshole. Sadly, just a few days later, little Eliana would die because of her injuries. Her death was ruled a homicide as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. Early on in the investigation, it came to light that a couple of witnesses noticed bruises and swelling on Eliana's face in the days leading up to her ultimate death. And on one occasion, a witness even told Cheyenne that she needed to be taken to the doctor. But Cheyenne snapped back at them and said, quote, "No. Under no circumstances are you to call an ambulance or take her to the hospital. I will make the decisions. That is my child." End quote. Cheyenne would eventually take her into the hospital, but not for another 8 days. Authorities also found that Cheyenne reportedly told a neighbor that Eliana was going to kill someone one day, and she also blamed Eliana as being the reason why her boyfriend wouldn't marry her. Even with all of this evidence, it would take nearly a year for Cheyenne to be arrested in connection to her daughter's death. During the trial, prosecutors couldn't prove that Cheyenne was the one who inflicted the injuries, but they were able to prove that Cheyenne neglected Eliana after the abuse. Cheyenne reportedly left Eliana in critical condition after the abuse and went to work, which is what ultimately led to her death. On Tuesday, Cheyenne was convicted of child neglect causing death and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. She showed no emotion or remorse in court. It's stories like this that anger me so much and make me realize that not everyone should be allowed to have kids.
This is a disturbing disappearance case. These girls were never found.
Not even their bodies or remains?
The only thing that was found was a book bag, which had some of their belongings. But the main thing is we're following along with the pictures on their camera. They had just recently graduated university or college. They had saved up a lot of money and they wanted to travel to South America. So first the trip started in Costa Rica. Then they shifted over to Panama. So they were recording, documenting the whole trip. They decided to go on a hiking trail, which is the most popular one, which is called El Pianista, known to be dangerous because of the terrain. These are the girls. You can see they're just taking pictures of themselves on the hiking trail.
This is low-key eerie, bro. We're literally following their final moments.
Through the pictures, the people who are native to the land and shit, they came to the conclusion that they reached El Mirador, which is the top of the mountain or a summit. But the thing is, usually tourists, whenever they reach that spot, they turn back.
So they kept going.
For whatever reason, they kept walking. Maybe felt like they could go more.
Or maybe they were chased.
But weird stuff did start happening with their phone. They tried 11 times to call the authorities. 77 attempts with the wrong passcode to log into the iPhone. 7 days pass, and now we get to more pictures on the Canon camera, which are called the nighttime photos.
Whoa.
The nighttime photos are very, very different, bro. They're just more random. And then this is also another one, which they're trying to say that maybe it's...
Oh, it's her?
Yeah, but it wouldn't make sense because where's her shoulder and shit, you know?
It looks like they're using the camera as a light source.
This case reminds a lot of people, specifically the picture, the movie Megan is Missing.
The man you just saw walking in that video was pedophile Jeffrey Doucette. Jeffrey was a 25-year-old karate instructor. Jeffrey gave karate lessons to young boys, and it's assumed that he did this to gain access to children because he was a pedophile. Now, at some point along the way, Jeffrey met the son of a man named Gary Plauché. Gary was a very protective father who loved his son dearly. And when Gary eventually found out that Jeffrey had been molesting his son for over a year, he was righteously angry. But Gary just wasn't going to let this slide. You see, for a year, Gary had trusted Jeffrey to take care of his son and teach him karate. But at one point, Jeffrey had abducted his son, taken him to a motel in Anaheim, California, and did absolutely unspeakable things to him. So that leads us to the infamous televised incident. On that day, Jeffrey was flown to Louisiana to face trial. There was a news team there waiting for him at the airport for when he arrived into the state, but there was somebody else waiting for Jeffrey there as well, Gary Plauché. I can't show you the full clip obviously, but Gary was waiting for Jeffrey to walk down that hallway, and when he walked by him, he pulled out a handgun and shot Jeffrey, the man who molested his son, directly in the head. Afterwards, Gary gave himself up, dropped the gun, and he was initially charged with second-degree murder. But he entered a plea bargain and pled no contest to the manslaughter charges. He was then sentenced to 7 years of a suspended sentence, with 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service, meaning that Gary spent no extended time in prison for the murder of the pedophile. To this day, people still sell merchandise with Gary Plauché all over it, as he has become a folk hero of sorts to people that hate pedophiles. If you want to hear more stories like this, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available to listen to now on all streaming platforms. The person you just saw in that video was former elected official and pedophile Stacey Marie Lofton. Stacey was the first openly transgender person elected to a state legislature anywhere in the United States. And people at the time in New Hampshire who elected Stacey thought that this was extremely radical. They were proud that they were inclusive and that they were giving power to an underrepresented population. However, Stacey would go on to do some terrible things. Because you see, in 2023, Stacey would be arrested and charged with possession of CP or CSAM. I still don't know the exact connection, but Stacey was arrested as well as this woman, a 38-year-old woman named Lindsay Groves. Now, Lindsay worked at a place called Creative Minds Early Learning Center in Massachusetts, where she worked closely with children. And apparently, Lindsay would use the bathroom breaks during the children's school day to take photographs of them. Photographs of them in compromising positions with no clothing on. Lindsay would then send these photos to the person she was in a relationship with, and I guess somehow some of those photos ended up in Stacey's possession. Now, I don't know what happened to Stacey after all of this, but I do know that it was reported that Stacey went to a prison for men. And yeah, this is just some really disturbing stuff. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife Courtney, Murder in America. It's available now on all streaming platforms.
Devoted father, a capsized kayak, and a chilling trail of secrets. What really happened to Ryan Borgward? It was the 11th of August this year when Ryan took his kayak out. The 45-year-old father of 3 lived in Wisconsin with his family, and to outsiders looking in, they looked like a normal, happy family unit. Things turned very bizarre though when Ryan failed to come back from his fishing trip that day. He'd apparently gone out solo fishing on Wisconsin's Green Lake. Now, he texted his wife at nearly 11 that evening to say he was heading back to shore, but he never returned home. His worried family reported him missing to police and a huge search began. But police believe all was not as it seemed. Now, initially, people were really concerned when the search team discovered a capsized kayak. Then his wallet and his fishing rod were found nearby at a park. This was strange though, as why would the items have been there? It seemed that if he'd been out on his kayak, they would have been with him. It was almost as if they'd been placed for somebody to find. Now, months went by with no sign of the missing father. Then there was some more disturbing news in October this year. Investigators found that Ryan had seemingly gone through the Canadian border control the day after he was reported missing. Then there was another shocking revelation. It turned out that Ryan's passport had been reported missing or stolen in the months prior to his disappearance, and he was issued a new one. Had he done this on purpose so that he could keep his old passport at home for it to be discovered when he went missing, and he could go away with his new fresh passport and never be discovered? This could mean that he had planned this whole thing in the months prior. Now, Ryan's laptop was left at home and police decided to search it. A great deal of effort had been taken to delete search history. There was more damning evidence, though, that they found to suggest a staged disappearance. He'd searched how to transfer money to international banks and had also been in communication with a woman from Uzbekistan. It seems he'd gone to the effort to replace the hard drive on his computer and had also taken out a huge life insurance policy. Then eagle-eyed TikTok viewers noticed something really disturbing. There was a TikTok video online that you can find that essentially shows a girl sat there saying, "Does anybody want some free advice?" And a man cycles up and man asks her a question. Now, this man has a striking resemblance to Ryan, and people are wondering if it is him. He asks if he should move to another country to find a woman, and during their conversation, it's determined that he already has a wife and children. He says, should I go to Uzbekistan or stay here? Now, many people are trying to figure out whether the man in the video is actually Ryan or this is just a big coincidence. Personally, I really don't think this is him because the teeth just look different to me, but let me know what you guys think. If Ryan really has staged his own disappearance, he could face criminal charges.
This is the scariest story about the peephole, and this story is absolutely disturbing. A 15-year-old girl named Donna lived with her father in a very small house. Ever since her mother died, Donna had depended on her dad for literally everything. One morning, Donna's father was leaving for a business trip and he told her he wouldn't be back until later that night. And with that, he kissed Donna on the cheek and left. Later that day, Donna got home from school and did some homework and then relaxed and watched some TV. The clock then struck midnight and she noticed her father still wasn't back. So Donna decided to just go to bed. That night, Donna had a dream. She found herself standing on the edge of a busy highway. She then looked across the highway and saw a familiar figure standing there. It was her father, and his hands were cupped around his mouth trying to yell something to her. But Donna couldn't figure out what her dad was saying. She also saw that his eyes looked very sad, and he seemed to be desperately trying to communicate with her. She could barely make out the words he was saying, but it sounded like he was saying, "Don't open the door." Suddenly, Donna woke up to a tapping noise. Then suddenly, somebody rang the doorbell. Donna then got out of bed, got dressed, and then scrambled down to the front door. She then looked through the peephole and saw her father's face outside. He was staring directly at her and the doorbell was still ringing. "Okay, hold on, I'm coming," she shouted. She pulled back the deadbolt and was about to unlock the door when she suddenly stopped. She then looked through the peephole again and noticed there was something very off about her father's expression. His eyes were wide open and he looked very terrified. She then slid the deadbolt back into place and said, "Dad, did you forget your keys?" But the doorbell just kept ringing. "Dad, answer me," she said, but the doorbell continued to ring. "Dad, please, I need you to answer me. Is there somebody else out there with you?" But there was no answer and the doorbell continued to ring. Donna then yelled at the top of her lungs, "I'm not opening this door until you answer me." The doorbell continued to ring and her father did not answer her desperate cries. For the rest of the night, Donna sat in the corner next to the door crying and helplessly listening to the doorbell ringing over and over again. She then eventually fell asleep, and in the morning when she woke up, she noticed it was very quiet, so she got up and went over to the peephole. She then looked through it and saw her father still standing there staring. She then opened the door and was confronted with a sight that filled her with absolute horror. Her father's severed head was hanging from a nail above the door, and there was a note attached to the doorbell, and in weird sloppy handwriting it read, "You are a very clever girl."
18 months after his wife died, he married her caregiver, and that caregiver is now being accused of not only abusing him, but robbing him of millions of dollars. This story is the true definition of never knowing what goes on behind closed doors. This is 91-year-old Forrest Preston, and he's the founder of Life Care Centers, which is a nursing home chain founded in 1970. To this day, he is the sole owner of the company, which has over 200 nursing facilities and assisted living communities in 28 states. So in 2018, suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere, Forrest married 49-year-old Kim Phuong Nguyen. This happened just 18 months after his wife died, and what's crazy is the fact that Kim was his late wife's caregiver. They got married without any of Forrest's family knowing, so this was understandably a huge shock to his 4 kids. Ever since then, Kim and his family haven't really gotten along, but according to a recent court filing, Kim is now being accused of abusing Forrest, both physically and financially, and the findings and claims from this investigation are bizarre. Court documents state that Forrest has suffered from different stages of dementia since 2010, and he's currently disabled and unable to care for himself. Since the pandemic, Kim has reportedly isolated Forrest from his family and company officials. Meanwhile, and this is all alleged, she has funneled millions of his dollars worth of real estate and cash to herself and her family. Anytime Forrest has business calls, she will screen them, and not only that, she will attend all of his board meetings. It's being said that she makes all of his decisions for him and sometimes won't let him speak to important figures customers like lenders for months at a time, even in time-sensitive situations. Kim has also reportedly accused his employees of having affairs and would accept bribes, and she even threatened to kill a high-level life care executive who argued with her one time. She eventually got that executive fired. According to the legal filing, Kim once flashed a gun that she was wearing on her waistband to Forrest's family, saying that she would use it to protect him. Forrest's son has now filed for a conservatorship for his dad because he feels like he's not able to make the sound decisions needed to keep life care centers running. He feels that it's already bad enough that Kim has stolen so much money from Forrest, but now it seems like that isn't enough. Now it seems like she wants total control over the nursing home chain, and the decisions that she's been making are quite literally putting the company in jeopardy. It's gotten so bad that lenders are now refusing to move forward with the company until it can essentially get everything under control. Now the company is behind $100 million in deferred maintenance and equipment that hasn't properly been taken care of. It's had to recently close down or sell several facilities just to keep its head above water. What's really concerning is the fact that the last time Forrest was really seen in public was 2 years ago, and Kim was right by his side. His son began to worry about him and the company when, out of nowhere, Forrest suddenly said that he wanted to make his new wife the CEO of the company, even though she is really not qualified for that position. That, and when company executives and board members started contacting him, asking him what was really going on, and pretty much informing him that the whole company will likely fail if it continues down this path. Because of the recent legal accusations, a judge has ordered Forrest to undergo medical exams to determine whether or not he is mentally able to continue in his position with the company. He is going to be interviewed away from Kim and her family by a court-appointed attorney who will act as his guardian. Kim will also be interviewed as well. This entire case was filed under the Tennessee Adult Protection Act. This is just really sad to me because he quite literally dedicated his life to caring for the elderly and making sure they have a safe community. And now at 91, he's being taken advantage of. This isn't just a one-off situation either. People think that once you turn a certain age that you can pretty much just do whatever you want to them. And it's scary how often this happens.
TikTok star posted a video practicing for his mugshot and then ended up getting charged with murder. Terrion Thomas was a 20-year-old TikToker known as Mr. Prada to his fans on the app. He had a whopping 4 million followers on the app and would regularly post funny, relatable content. Suddenly he's become known for a lot more than just his relatable videos though. It was the 28th of September 2024. At roughly 11 a.m, a man called William Abraham, who was in his 60s and worked as a therapist, was seen entering Terrion's apartment. His car was spotted parked outside and he was captured on CCTV walking into the building. Now, William was actually known for not only working with mental health clients, but was also a motivational speaker. It's not known whether Terrion was a client of William's or how the pair knew each other at all, but court records show that in 2015, William was actually accused of inappropriately touching an 11-year-old client. Charges were apparently dropped. After he was seen entering the apartment, then something else disturbing was captured on CCTV. Terrion left his apartment alone, dragging a heavy-looking tarp down the stairs and then loading it into William's car. Witnesses also later came forward to state that they had also witnessed this. Terrion drove off and then a harrowing discovery was made. William's body was discovered dumped at the side of the road in Louisiana. Medical examiners determined that he had been bludgeoned to death, and a murder investigation quickly began. They needed to track down William's missing vehicle, as they knew that the key to solving this case could be who was behind the wheel of that car. They did manage to track it down using ANPR cameras, and lo and behold, Terrion was behind the wheel. Now, he refused to stop when they tried to pull him over, and he apparently tried to evade officers and even allegedly reversed into a police car in the panic. When officers searched his apartment, they allegedly found sharp objects, blood, and weapons. DNA analysis was done on this blood, and reportedly it matched to William. Terrion has been charged with murder. Those who knew William described him as gentle and called his murder senseless.
I've covered countless true crime cases, but this one has to be one of the worst. This is the case of Sylvia Likens, who was a 16-year-old girl who, along with her younger sister Jenny, was left in the care of Jarud Benisweski by her parents. Jarud was a single mother with several children of her own. She agreed to take care of the Likens sisters in exchange for a small amount of money every week. The Liken parents were carnival workers and believed their daughters would be safe with Jarud. But that was far from the truth. Things took a horrific turn when Giroud and her children began to subject Sylvia to prolonged physical and emotional abuse. She was physically beaten, starved, and subjected to various forms of torture. Giroud's children and some neighborhood kids also participated in the abuse. Sylvia was kept locked in the basement where she endured unimaginable suffering. Giroud and the children not only beat Sylvia, but they also forced her to write degrading statements all over her own body, including phrases like, "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it." Sylvia was also burned with cigarettes, had her head shaved, and was often deprived of food and water. This abuse continued for months. On one occasion, as the family ate supper, Giroud, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy force-fed Sylvia a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard, ketchup, and spices. Sylvia vomited as a result and was later forced to eat her own vomit. On another occasion, Paula, who was Giroud's daughter, beat Sylvia in the face with such force that she broke her own wrist. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Sylvia. Giroud would also occasionally force Jenny, who was her younger sister, to strike her and beat her. And if she did not comply, they would just beat her. Several of Giroud's children's classmates frequently visited the house to both physically and verbally torment Sylvia. And with Giroud's active encouragement, these neighborhood children and her own routinely beat Sylvia, sometimes even using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, also lacerating her body and burning her with lit cigarettes over 100 times. They also severely injured her genitals. To entertain Giroud and her teenage accomplices, Sylvia was forced at one point to strip naked in the family living room and masturbate with a glass Pepsi Cola bottle in their presence. And this was all for the enjoyment of this woman right here. And due to the increase in the frequency and the brutality of the torture and mistreatment of Sylvia, she gradually became incontinent, which is the uncontrolled leakage of urine. She was then denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself. And as a form of punishment, Giroud threw Sylvia into the basement and tied her up. Here, Sylvia was kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. On October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape from the basement after overhearing a conversation, after overhearing Giroud say they were just going to leave her to die in the basement. Sylvia attempted to flee to the front door, however, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Giroud caught her before she could escape the property. And on the morning of October 26, 1965, Sylvia Likens tragically succumbed to her injuries and died in the basement. Her cause of death was a combination of severe malnutrition, physical trauma, and the overall abuse she endured. Her body was found with numerous injuries, including broken bones and extensive scarring, and the autopsy showed that there was more than 150 wounds across her body. Giroud was found guilty of first-degree murder and she was sentenced to life in prison. But somehow she was released in 1985 on parole, which is just sickening. She deserves to be underneath the prison. This is just absolutely horrifying. The Sylvia Likens case is a heartbreaking and disturbing true crime story that continues to captivate and horrify people to this day. There's a lot more I could talk about in this case, so if you want a part 2, let me know. Rest in peace to Sylvia Likens, and I can't believe this case.
Nothing scares me more than when someone vanishes into thin air. Hana Kobayashi disappeared on November 11th after missing her flight at LAX. But before she disappeared, she sent a string of bizarre text messages. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance are strange, so let's talk about it. So on November 8th of this year, Hana flew from her home in Maui to Los Angeles, and her plan was to then get on a connecting flight to New York to visit family and attend a concert. Hana was super excited to go to this concert and to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, as she is an aspiring photographer and a really good one at that. She spent thousands of dollars on this trip well in advance, so she was super excited about it. But after landing at LAX, Hana accidentally missed her connecting flight to New York, so to kill time while waiting for a last-minute flight to open up, she decided to go into downtown Los Angeles to sightsee. To be more specific, she went to the Grove Shopping Center, which is about 10 miles away from the airport. On November 9th, Hana was seen at a bookstore called Taschin, and a day later, she attended a Nike event in the same area where she took this photo. She's also seen in the background of a YouTube video at the same event. On November 11th, Hannah's mom texted her asking if she had made it to New York yet, in which Hannah replied, not yet. This is when things start to get strange. Hannah's friends and family then began receiving a string of bizarre text messages from Hannah's phone. In one text to a friend, Hannah said that she got tricked into pretty much giving away all of her funds from someone she thought she loved. In another text, she said, quote, "Deep hackers wiped my identity, stole all of my funds, and have had me in a mind since Friday." End quote. The last time anyone heard from Hannah was this final text. She said she had a spiritual awakening, was charging her phone, and then heading back to the airport to go to New York. She said she might need some help getting there, and then it's a long story, but she told her family that she was scared. After this, Hannah vanished, and no one has heard from her since. Her phone soon went dead, but what's odd is that her family and friends say that these last texts don't really sound like her. She was reportedly calling them hun and babe, which is something that she doesn't really ever say. Her final post on Instagram was the same day, and it was a photo she took at the Nike event the day prior. After a while of not hearing from Hannah and the odd text messages coming from her phone, her family reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. During the investigation, police found that Hannah's phone last pinged at 4 p.m. on November 11th at LAX, which is the day she was sending those weird texts. But after this, her phone went dead. Adding to the mystery is the fact that before she disappeared, Hannah sent money via Venmo to 2 separate people who her family does not recognize. Recently, surveillance footage has emerged that shows Hannah the night she went missing, but it only brings more questions than answers. On the evening of November 11th, well after her phone died, Hannah was seen on security footage near the Crypto Arena, which is about 20 miles from the airport. Her family says that from that footage, it's clear that she wasn't in good condition. Hannah was then seen later that same night on security footage at the Hawthorne Lenox light rail station. She was not alone this time though. She was with an unknown man, and according to her family, she looked really tired and disassociated. It's not clear what happened to Hannah after this, and it's like she vanished into thin air, but her family believes that she has been abducted. The FBI is now involved in this case, and there have been multiple searches for Hannah, but she is still missing. Authorities are in the process of getting any extra security footage that they can find, as well as her phone records and bank statements. They're also trying to access all of her social media accounts to see if that can provide any clues into what happened to her. One thing that's important to note is that Hannah's ex-boyfriend was also traveling on that same flight from Maui to Los Angeles. They didn't sit together or even speak on the flight though, but he went because they'd already booked this trip prior to breaking up. He has reportedly been cooperative with authorities and Hannah's family, and he did board that connecting flight to New York that Hannah missed. I just wanted to point that out because it will come up when you research Hannah's case. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that Hannah's family says that she doesn't suffer from any mental illness, and she's not on any medication that could possibly cause her to have an adverse reaction or anything like that. It's now been over a week since Hannah made any contact with her family, which is extremely out of character for her. She would never just leave her family like this. If you're in the downtown Los Angeles area, or possibly even Skid Row or Compton, please keep your eyes peeled. These are some of her characteristics and what she was last seen wearing. You can also join this Facebook group to keep up with information directly from the family. If you have any information, please contact the number on the screen.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
A missing woman has been found and is now charged with falsely reporting her own murder. 37-year-old Margaret Sweeney from North Carolina was recently reported missing. In a bizarre twist in this case, she's now facing charges related to faking her own murder. She's facing the charges of causing false report to a police station, false report of death or serious injury, and obstructing law enforcement officers. It's believed that initially police received a call which insinuated that Margaret was endangered or deceased. The day after, police were actually able to identify where she was by pinging her phone. She was discovered safe and unharmed. It's now alleged that the woman made anonymous third-party false reports to a friend and the Department of Social Services that she'd been murdered. Police at the moment are unsure why she may have done this, but they did say it does appear that there was some domestic issues with the boyfriend.
I killed my 5-year-old brother and ate his private parts. My name is Karina Ross, and I'm an 18-year-old Brazilian girl. It's all happening in 2019. My mother went shopping and left my little brother and me alone. When she came back, she found the front door locked. Completely worried, she shouted my name, but I refused to let her in. So she decided to call her brother to break down the door. When they both came in, they discovered a horrible scene, so gruesome that my mother fainted. 2 hours before, I went into my little brother's room to suggest we play a game. For no reason at all, I grabbed a pillow and strangled him. Then I took a knife and started torturing him. I removed his private parts and ate them. When my family discovered the scene, I tried to escape by fighting with my uncle, and they immediately called the police. I confessed to everything at the police station and was charged with first-degree murder. I'm now in a psychiatric hospital.
This is the scariest story about sneaking out. One summer night, a girl named Kim snuck out of her house to go to a party. When she got to the party, she started saying hi to all of her friends, got a couple drinks, and started having a great time. Later that night, when the party ended and everybody started to leave, Kim started walking home. And the whole time walking home, she had the strangest feeling that somebody was watching her. So Kim began walking a little bit faster. Then, out of nowhere, a man dressed in all black appeared on the road. Kim then let out a terrifying scream as the man sprinted towards her. The next morning, Kim's parents were woken up by somebody knocking on the door. When Kim's father looked through the peephole, he saw Kim's face. So he immediately opened the door. But what he saw when he opened that door haunts him to this day. It was Kim's severed head hanging from a nail above the door, with her head directly in front of the peephole. Kim's murderer was never found, and to this day the case remains open. And the scary part is, this man could be out there still doing the same exact thing he did to Kim.
I was burned in an oven because of my 3-year-old brother. My name is Jazeera Thompson, and I was 1.5 years old when this tragedy occurred. On November 16, 2015, my mother, Raquel Thompson, who was 25 years old, and my father, Cornell Malone, who was 21 years old, both left the house to buy a pizza, leaving me alone with my 2 brothers, one of whom was 3 years old, and the older one was 5 years old. A few minutes after they left us on our own while we were in the kitchen, my 3-year-old brother opened the oven and put me inside. I didn't understand what was happening, and he then turned on the oven to the maximum temperature. Unfortunately, I died from severe burns. My parents returned shortly after, discovering the horrifying scene. My brother explained everything to them, and investigators concluded that my parents had put us in danger by leaving us alone. As a result, both of them were arrested and charged with child endangerment. What do you think their punishment should be?
These are serial killers that got caught for being idiots. And yes, this is a series, so make sure you follow along. This is David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam. He's best known for being the serial unaliver who believed that his neighbor's dog was telling him to commit the crimes. And he was really hard to catch. His attacks felt random and lacked pattern, other than the fact that a lot of his victims were women with long brown hair. But the thing that did this man in was that he parked illegally while committing one of the crimes. Cecilia Davis was out walking her dog one night when she saw a car being ticketed. And then out of nowhere, she sees this figure come towards her with what looks like a gun in his hand. She freaks out and runs away, but hears 2 gunshots get fired behind her. The next day, she learns that 2 people, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante, had been shot in that area. So she calls the police and tells them everything she saw that night. The man with the gun, hearing the gunshots, and seeing the car with the ticket. And the cops did a real quick search through their database and found that the car had been registered to Berkowitz, who was already on their radar. And the second they went to question him about it, he confessed to everything.
This is the scariest story about the mistake. A girl named Kelly was on a business trip for 3 days, and she was so excited to see her husband and kid. But when she got home, the only one that was waiting for her was her kid. Kelly then asked, "Where's daddy?" and her kid then said, "Upstairs with a girl." Kelly immediately got a pit in her stomach and walked up the stairs slowly, and then opened their bedroom door and saw her husband in there with another girl. Kelly started to scream and cry, and her husband tried to explain himself, but Kelly wasn't listening at all. And in a pit of rage, Kelly went down to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She then went back into the room and stabbed her husband countless times. The other woman in the room was shocked and completely lost for words. Kelly then pointed the knife at her and said, "You're next." But then the woman said, "Wait, he wasn't cheating on you. He thought you weren't going to be home till tomorrow, and I'm a party planner. And he hired me to set up and throw a party for you." The woman then showed Kelly the idea her husband had. Kelly then dropped the knife and couldn't believe what she just did. Kelly then went downstairs, grabbed her kid, and left. And to this day, nobody has ever seen Kelly or her kid again.
These serial killers got caught because of stupid mistakes they made. And I cover all sorts of true crime and spooky stuff here, so make sure you follow along. Dennis Rader was a prolific serial killer in Kansas from 1974 to 1991. He was called BTK, which stood for bind, torture, kill, because that's what he liked to do. But he also liked to taunt the police. He would send the police letters signed BTK, which could not be traced back to his real identity. So in the early 2000s, he had been dormant for over 10 years, but he still liked to taunt the police. And the early 2000s also brought new technology for communicating. So BTK, being the mad genius he was, wrote a letter to police asking if he sent them a floppy disk, would they be able to trace it back to him? And the police answered this letter basically saying, no, we totally can't do that. So BTK sends the police a floppy disk, and there's metadata on this floppy disk that says the last edit was done by someone named Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. And then a 10-second Google search showed police that Dennis Rader was the president of the council at Christ Lutheran Church. Afterwards, the police basically came out and said that if Dennis had just kept his mouth shut and kept murdering, they probably would have never caught him. Let me know if you want more of these, because there's some other idiots out there.
I let a woman burn alive because she rejected my advances. I am Michael Lamar, an experienced firefighter in New York, and this is my story. 2 years after a painful breakup with my ex-girlfriend of over 5 years, I was going through a depressive period. During an outing with friends, I met Mariah White, a woman who changed the course of my life. I knew she was the woman of my dreams. Despite the predictable rejection of her advances, she crossed the line by humiliating me publicly in front of my friends, claiming to be far too beautiful for me. This humiliation destroyed the little confidence I had left, giving rise to a deep hatred towards this woman. A few days later, during a night shift, I was called to a fire, still haunted by the hatred and disappointment towards Mariah. As I arrived at the scene, I remembered it was the neighborhood where I had met her. We managed to save about 10 people from the flames. During the final check, I found Mariah unconscious due to the smoke. Surprised at first, relief overcame my emotions. I left her there, confirming to my team that no one was left. As I exited the building, people hailed me as a hero, oblivious to the dark story of that night. For a few years, I was able to live my life peacefully. However, thanks to a lengthy investigation, I was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison.
This sheepdog killed 8 coyotes while protecting its sheep. This video is of sheepdog Casper fighting off a pack of 11 coyotes who were trying to kill his sheep and eat them. Casper ended up killing 8 of them, but he was badly injured. The fight lasted more than a half an hour, and Casper's owner said that he disappeared for 2 days after the brutal fight. They were quoted saying, "We knew he was hurt because we found parts of his tail and blood and other things. So we were very worried." Casper eventually returned home with visible injuries. His owner said it looked like the coyotes just grabbed his skin and ripped it off. Casper was a watchdog for a flock of sheep in Georgia, United States. He was confronted by 11 coyotes and he had to choose whether to fight or fight because there was a flock of sheep and a pregnant dog under his watch. So Casper fought off 11 coyotes, of which he killed 8 in the initial attack, and then ran off into the forest and chased down the 3 other coyotes that escaped and killed them one by one. Casper then returned a week later with injuries to his neck, paws, and his tail was missing. He is now recovering. This might honestly be the Superman of dogs, and if you never heard the story about Casper the dog, well, now you have. The Hunger Games was actually based off a brutal Japanese novel called Battle Royale. Okay, so The Hunger Games is one of America's most successful franchises ever, for its unique plot of picking 2 kids from each district to fight to the death. But have you ever heard of the Japanese novel and movie called Battle Royale? If not, this is what The Hunger Games is based off of. The Japanese action thriller Battle Royale was released in 2000 and is based off the controversial novel from 1999. The movie follows a group of junior high school students who were forced to fight to the death by the Japanese government. The film drew a lot of controversy and was actually banned or excluded from distribution in several countries. In the movie, Japan just went through a recession, and the Japanese government passes an act to stop juvenile delinquency, sending a random middle school class to participate in a game called Battle Royale, where all the students in the class would have to fight to the death. This movie is extremely brutal, and it's definitely way more disturbing than The Hunger Games. People consider this to be better than The Hunger Games, and some people even consider it to be their favorite movie of all time. The movie, in my opinion, is extremely good, and this film created the Battle Royale genre, including Battle Royale games, anime, comic books, films, and many more. So if you're a fan of the Hunger Games, I really recommend to watch this movie because you're gonna love it.
The tragic death of Kobe Bryant shocked America and was a horrible way to start out the year 2020. So if you don't know who Kobe Bryant was, he was one of the most famous basketball players on the planet, playing for the Lakers for years. Before his death, Kobe Bryant was a household name. Everybody knew this guy. And he was one of the most beloved players and figures in all of the sporting world. Kobe Bryant meant a lot to a lot of people, and that's what made this helicopter crash so tragic. So on January 26, 2020, Kobe Bryant and 8 other people boarded this helicopter. That day, everybody aboard was headed to Kobe's Mamba Sports Academy, where Kobe was set to coach his daughter Gianna's team. So on board the plane were Kobe and his daughter Gianna, baseball coach John Altobelli, John's wife Carrie and his daughter Alyssa, Peyton Chester and her mother Sarah, basketball coach Christina Mauser, and the pilot Era Zobayan. Everybody that day was headed to the youth basketball game at the Mamba Academy, and all of their lives would end in a horrific way. That day the weather conditions were not ideal. There were a lot of clouds, it was very dark and hard to see, and if you don't know the geography of the area where this crash occurred, it's very hilly, big mountains everywhere. These dense and foggy weather conditions caused low visibility. Weather conditions which eventually sent the pilot and the helicopter off track. It sent it spiraling down at a very high speed and it crashed into the side of a hill. The area immediately caught fire, there was debris everywhere, and all 9 of the people on board perished. There's a lot that went wrong during this flight. There's a lot of detail that I could go into, but it would take a whole nother TikTok. 2 mountain bikers who were in the area witnessed the crash and immediately called 911, but it was too late and everybody had already perished. Eventually, the medical examiners determined that all 9 of the people on board had died from blunt force trauma. And this accident is going to go down in United States history as one of the most shocking helicopter crashes of all time.
This is the moment 44-year-old Jay Black went live on Facebook just moments before killing his ex-wife. He'd also just shot and killed his pregnant ex-girlfriend.
Anyway, I just did something crazy, man. I just shot my ex-girlfriend in the head, yo. Felt like a dream. Like, I never thought I would be that guy. I can't go to prison, so the person that really started my depression and all of this is my ex-wife. So she next, and then I'm going to do myself too, but I just wanted to say this to people. Don't play with people's emotions, man. Don't lie on these men. Oh, here's my ex-wife right here.
According to Jay, his ex-girlfriend Tara LeBang, also 44, had said that she would deny access to their baby. So he shot her in the head, killing her instantly. He then went over to his ex-wife's house. Jay's ex-wife, Wendy Black, had filed multiple protection orders against him, which were all denied. She even went as far as writing a note. It said, "I am terrified because I do not know what he is capable of doing to me and the girls. I feel scared and I feel like my life is in danger." After killing Tara, he immediately went round to Wendy's and with the children in an SUV that was parked in the driveway, he did a live stream on Facebook confessing to killing Tara and saying that his ex-wife was next and then he was going to kill himself. As you can see from the video, he then entered the property and just after this he shot his ex-wife and then shot and killed himself. A sad, shocking end to their lives.
This true crime murder case is honestly like something out of a very far-fetched film. Rachel Del Tondo was suspended as a teacher in Pennsylvania. Rachel was seemingly happy with her millionaire fiancé. However, in 2016, she was actually discovered in a parked, steamed-up car with a 17-year-old student. This student was Sheldon Jetta. Now, Rachel managed to convince the police officer that the pair were just talking and not to file a report because she didn't want to make her fiancé angry. Now, later in 2017, things did come to the surface. The report ended up being filed just in case anyone got wind of it. However, this was then leaked to the media and obviously the school that Rachel was working at. Rachel was suspended pending an investigation and her fiancé broke up with her. Bizarrely, 2 months after the suspension, Rachel actually ended up in a relationship with Sheldon's older brother, Bolton. Now, fast forward to May the 13th, 2018, Rachel went for some ice cream. Little did she know she was being watched. She ended up being dropped off at her parents' house at around 10:30, but she was gunned down at the bottom of their driveway. She was shot between 10 and 12 times. Now, although nobody has been convicted for Rachel's murder yet, Sheldon is now classed as the prime suspect. In another strange twist of events, in 2021, Sheldon was actually convicted of murdering his friend Tyreek Pugh, again after going for ice cream. Rachel's murder has actually been very hard to solve due to the lack of witnesses. Frustratingly, the murder weapon was also never found. However, GPS and CCTV footage has built a strong circumstantial case against Sheldon. It showed an alleged pattern of stalking Rachel around the time of her murder. Morgan Martin was 4 months pregnant when she vanished. It was the 25th of July 2012 and she was 17. She told family and friends that the father of the baby was Jacoby Flowers, aged 24. Morgan was actually looking forward to being a mum despite her young age, and she was excited for the future. Knowing this, her parents were immediately concerned when she vanished. They just knew she wouldn't have left of her own accord. On the evening in question, she left her home in Tampa just after midnight. She was actually wearing pajamas at the time and had just stepped off her porch to apparently show the sonogram to the father of the baby. She seemed like she would just be a couple of minutes and then would return home. So when she failed to come back, her mum was really worried. Her purse and sonogram photo were both left behind. Police got involved and questioned Jacoby. He denied knowing anything and also denied having anything to do with Morgan. He said he wasn't the father to her unborn child, they were just acquaintances and they'd never even been intimate. Morgan's family and friends were obviously really suspicious of him, but police just didn't have any grounds to arrest him. Frustratingly, Morgan's case went cold and she was never heard from again. Throughout the years, police re-interviewed people and looked over old evidence. Now, Jacoby's story changed when police showed him text messages that proved he had in fact been intimate with Morgan. He then decided to say that he'd actually begged Morgan to get rid of the pregnancy, that he was concerned about being potentially in trouble with police because she was a minor. He also apparently already had 3 children and was concerned about how it would affect his current relationship to have a new baby. In 2016, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Finally, in 2022, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder because of a plea agreement. He was given just 25 years in prison in exchange for the location of Morgan's remains. If the remains weren't found, he was due to spend 40 years behind bars. He told police where Morgan's remains were, but they weren't found. Now, it's not clear whether he lied about this or whether the wildlife had kind of just taken the remains away over the years. He was given the full 40 years in prison because of this, and Morgan has still never been found.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This is one of the most shocking love triangle murders I've ever heard. Erin Corwin was only 19 years old, living in California. She was married to US Marine Jonathan, and the pair were childhood sweethearts. They'd met when they were in middle school and even got engaged when they were in high school. They got married in 2012, and a year later, Jonathan was stationed in California with the Marines. They moved to 29 Palms and seemed happy. Things actually worked out well at first, and they met another couple that was stationed on the military base. The pair in question were Nicole and Christopher Lee. They had a similar story. They were childhood sweethearts, but they did actually have a 6-year-old daughter. The couples grew close, and Erin would babysit for their daughter occasionally. Things seemed to be going well, but behind closed doors, Erin and Christopher had started an affair. Jonathan actually found out about this and was understandably very upset. Erin convinced him that she would end things and it was just a one-off and it would not happen again. Jonathan gave her the benefit of the doubt, but unfortunately Erin did continue the affair. By June 2014, things got very complicated indeed. Erin was pregnant. To make matters worse, she was convinced that the baby was Christopher's and not Jonathan's. Erin was strangely excited about this, and she seemed to want a future with Christopher despite the fact that they were both married to different people. On the 28th of June that year, Christopher invited Erin hiking at Joshua Tree State Park. He told her he had a surprise for her and she thought he might propose. She lied to Jonathan about where she was going and met up with Christopher to start the hike. Unfortunately, the surprise was not what Erin had hoped. Christopher would strangle Erin to death during the meet and threw her down a mine shaft. Jonathan was obviously worried when she didn't come home that night, and he reported this to police. Investigators got involved and quickly found out about the affair, so they questioned Christopher. He denied having anything to do with the disappearance. Tellingly, just days later, he left the Marines and then moved to Alaska with his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, police were examining tire tracks in the area where Erin's car had been found. The tracks matched Christopher's vehicle. A month or so later, Erin's body was also discovered. Christopher was arrested and pleaded not guilty. He admitted to the murder but claimed it was not premeditated. He claimed that Erin had confessed to him that she had SA'd his daughter. He said he flew into a rage and killed her. The jury did not believe this story and he was sentenced to life in prison.
This is the New York City Murder Mansion, one of the most haunted places on Staten Island. In reality, this place is called the Kreischer Mansion and was built in 1885 by a man named Balthazar Kreischer. Originally, there were two Kreischer mansions. One belonged to Balthazar's son Charles, and the other belonged to his other son, Edward. Only one mansion survives to this day, and it was the one owned by Edward. Only about a decade after the mansions were constructed, Edward took a pistol, walked outside, and took his own life. And after Edward's death, Charles went crazy. He hired psychics, he held these huge Ouija board sessions in the parlor room of the house, and he wanted to contact his brother to see if he actually died by his own hand. It's still a mystery whether Edward actually took his own life or if he was murdered. Now, if you ask me, doing all these Ouija board sessions and spirit contact sessions in the house, you're asking for the place to be haunted, and yes, it became haunted eventually. But that isn't the end of the bloodshed at the Kreischer Mansion. So in the year 1998, the Kreischer Mansion was bought with the intention for the property to be restored. But in the year 2008, a shocking revelation occurred. Apparently, the caretaker, Joseph Joe Black Young, was a hitman for the Bonanno crime family. And it was discovered that a few years earlier, rival mob associate Rob McKelvey, pictured here, had been murdered inside of the Kreischer Mansion. And his murder was brutal. He was murdered in the entryway to the house. He was dismembered inside of the building. It was a very, very bloody scene. And then his body was burned in the furnace in the basement. So this place is definitely cursed, it's definitely haunted, and for years people have been saying that this is the most haunted place in New York City. I mean, just take a look at some of these photos. I don't know what these green orbs are up here. I'm not really an orb guy, but they do capture some interesting stuff there. But then look at this. This is an apparition that was caught on camera in the Kreischer Mansion just a few years ago. And I mean, there have been so many full-bodied apparitions caught on camera there. I'm not really that big on spirit photos, but some of these just can't be denied. I'm not even showing the craziest ones. So if this story interests you and you want to see a full overnight ghost hunt that we did there, you can go check out the new video on the New York Post's YouTube channel or on the New York Post website. The series that I'm involved with and that I host on there is called Haunted, Abandoned, and Hella Creepy. And this is the first episode. It just premiered today. We stayed overnight at the Kreischer Mansion. We caught some incredible evidence, including, this is the craziest thing. This is something that you don't see all the time when you ghost hunt. We were down in the basement where the body was burned, and we asked for a sign, and one of the light bulbs hanging from a string, actually the light bulb that was right in front of us, it was on the whole time we were shooting. And as soon as we asked for a sign, the light bulb just started to flicker in front of us. The whole cast and the crew were like, what the hell? We all looked at it. And all of a sudden the light bulb flickers and it slowly fades out and burns out completely right in front of us. So yeah, check out Haunted, Abandoned, and Hella Creepy right now on YouTube. Just search for the New York Post. Super excited to be hosting the show. And yeah, let me know if you want to hear more ghost stories from New York.
Quick trigger warning for part 2. The details of Elisa's death are quite hard to listen to. Now that she had full custody of her daughter, the abuse of Elisa escalated really quickly. Awilda took her out of her private school and enrolled her in a public school. The school's principal quickly observed that Elisa, now aged 5, was emotionally disturbed, withdrawn, and was having regular toileting accidents at school. The principal and Elisa's teachers also noted multiple bruises, and Elisa had started tearing out chunks of her own hair. On March 20th, 1994, Elisa was admitted to hospital with a broken shoulder. This injury was actually found to be 3 days old. Elisa's teachers contacted social services to say that they thought she was being abused, but this was rejected due to lack of evidence. And in December that year, Awilda actually withdrew Elisa from school permanently. She'd also started using crack cocaine again. With Elisa now permanently at home with her mother, the abuse escalated even more. She was locked in her room for most of the day, was not allowed to socialise with her siblings, and was forced to use a chamber pot kept in her bedroom. She was actually forced to eat and drink the contents of her chamber pot. She was regularly kicked, punched, burnt, and Awilda would hold her upside down and mop the floor with her face and hair. She was hung from a curtain rod for Awilda's entertainment, and she had a heavy chest of drawers dropped on her toes and fingers. She was also sexually abused quite regularly. On November 15th, 1995, Elisa was beaten so badly by her mother that she lost consciousness. A welder had slammed her head into a concrete wall so hard that she dropped to the floor and it caused a brain hemorrhage. Elisa lay in the house, lifeless, for 2 whole days. A welder actually contacted her sister at one point and said that she was laid on the floor with fluid leaking from her nose and mouth. This was found later to be brain fluid. Her sister urged her to call an ambulance and she said she would the next morning. The next day, a neighbour came round and a welder made no attempts to hide Elisa's body. She was laid there on the floor and the neighbour immediately called an ambulance. Elisa was pronounced dead and an autopsy showed a catalogue of injuries. She had broken fingers, broken toes, damage to her internal organs, evidence of sexual abuse and a massive brain injury. Elisa's funeral was held on November 29th, 1995 and there were around 300 people in attendance. Awilda Lopez pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given a term of 15 years to life. She's been denied parole a number of times, the latest being in 2022.
This is Larry Nassar, the former doctor to the United States women's gymnastics team, and a serial child molester. Before his fall from grace, Larry was a very well-respected doctor and he held a very high position in the sports world. From the year 1996 to the year 2014, Larry served as the National Medical Coordinator for the USA Gymnastics team. Basically, he was ensuring that all the competitors on the team were fit, he would treat injuries, he would do checkups, all of that. Allegations that Larry had been attracted to and had been touching minors first surfaced in the early 90s. But it took until the year 2015 for all of this to come to light. So in all of those years, he was allowed to do all of these things to these young girls completely unchecked. So in 2015, a gymnast and her coach reported Larry to the USA Gymnastics officials, and in 2016, USA Gymnastics completely cut ties with Larry. But it turns out that for years, decades, Larry had been touching young minor girls while they were getting exams from him. One former gymnast named Rachel Denhollander stated that Larry had abused her 5 times during 5 doctor visits in the year 2000 when she was a minor. And after these accusations came out, the case was blown wide open and so many gymnasts came forward and said that Larry had sexually abused them during their checkups, including Simone Biles, who at the time was one of the most famous gymnastic athletes on the planet. According to these girls, when they were minors, Larry would groom them. He would say nice things to them, offer them great benefits. He would send them flirty messages on social media outside of office hours when he knew they were underage. And yeah, like I said, during these examinations, he would frequently touch them, probe them, do all sorts of deplorable things to these girls. Well, this turned into a huge story because apparently even the FBI was involved in the cover-up of this abuse. And a couple of gymnasts, including Michaela Maroney, had to go testify before the US Senate to expose this cover-up. You see, Larry had been protected by the organization he was involved with, and for years he was able to carry on with this pattern of horrific abuse without any sort of checks or ramifications. But finally, that all came to an end. There's so much more to this story, so many more graphic details, including what he did to the girls at a camp in Huntsville, Texas. And as of January of 2018, over 135 women had come forward and stated that Larry Nassar abused them. This was a guy that they trusted, that was hired by the organization they were involved with to help protect them, to make them better, to heal them. And he ended up causing so much damage that's so irreparable, it's horrific. And even later in 2018, a judge stated that they had identified over 265 victims of his serial child molesting. And the judge stated that there were probably so many more that would never come forward that they would never know about. Thankfully, though, some justice was eventually served here, and Larry was sentenced to 40 to 125 years in prison. And I think we all know how child molesters get treated in prison. I remember this being a huge scandal when this story broke, and the cover-up and everything. It's just such a sad story, but I have to commend the bravery of the athletes for finally coming forward and ending this abuse.